All right, we are back for another episode of The Liz Wheeler Show. Happy Thursday, which is something I don't ordinarily say. We didn't have our regularly scheduled show yesterday for two reasons. Number one, I was filming a special with Glenn Beck, which aired last night. If you haven't had a chance to watch that, highly recommend it. We had a very good time filming that, even as we covered some very heavy topics, but a lot of predictions about what's going to happen in 2026, which you may be interested in. So highly recommend you go watch that. The other reason that we didn't film this episode yesterday is because we wanted to make sure that we were buttoned up with our sourcing, because we have some breaking news today on the Liz Wheeler Show. Our breaking news today is related to the alleged pipe bomber, the man who was arrested by the FBI last week on December 4th and charged with placing the pipe bombs outside of the RNC headquarters and DNC headquarters in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021. I'm, of course, referencing Brian Cole Jr. He's the man who was arrested by the FBI, the man who is accused of being the pipe bomber. Now, after that arrest happened and that announcement was made by the FBI that Brian Cole Jr., this 30-year-old black man, his family says he's autistic, not exactly nonverbal, but very antisocial. His neighbors say he doesn't talk to anybody. Not a lot's known about his background yet. You and I had a discussion about this on the show last week. We said, is he the real pipe bomber? It wasn't someone we expected to be named, and there wasn't a lot of information that was given to us by the FBI, and you had questions about whether this was really the guy. I had questions about whether this was really the guy. Now, I want to start today's show by saying I don't have the answers to all of the questions that we explored on the episode last week, but I do have for you today the beginnings of some answers to some of those questions. We're going to get into all of it today. Today's episode is sponsored by All Family Pharmacy. The holidays are here. I think it's safe to say. I start listening to Christmas music pretty early, so the holidays have been here with me for a while. But holidays are a time for family and celebration and reflection. It's also, unfortunately, the season when colds and the flu and all kinds of disgusting bugs start to spread. That's why I want to tell you about All Family Pharmacy. I am proud to partner with them because they make it simple to stay healthy and prepared right from the comfort of your own home. This is how it works. You just type in their website, allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. You search for the medication that works for you. You place your order online. A licensed physician then reviews it, and once approved, your medication ships directly to your door. No hassle, no clinic. Completely private and HIPAA compliant. So whether you're looking for ivermectin, antibiotics, or your everyday maintenance medications, All Family Pharmacy has you covered, and they believe in your medical freedom. It's an institution that shares your values, which is not something we can take for granted in today's day and age. Highly recommend you check them out, allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. If you use my promo code Liz10 this holiday season, you can save an extra 10%. That's allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. Use my code Liz10 for an extra 10%. And at the same time, I hope you stay well for the holidays. But you never know. All right. We do have breaking news on the Liz Wheeler Show today related to the alleged pipe bomber. Brian Cole Jr. was arrested last week by the FBI and charged with placing explosive devices, the pipe bombs, outside of the DNC headquarters, the RNC headquarters. He actually placed them allegedly on January 5th, the night before January 6th, but they weren't discovered until January 6th, actually the afternoon of January 6th. They were discovered about 15 minutes apart from each other, and also about 15 minutes before the first breach happened at the Capitol. Now, there was a report last week from NBC News, and I want to read the beginning of this report to you. The title of the report says, "Pipe bomb suspect told FBI he believed 2020 election conspiracy theories." And the article begins by saying the man charged with planting two pipe bombs near the Democratic and Republican Party headquarters on the eve of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol told the FBI he believed conspiracy theories about the 2020 election, according to two people familiar with the matter. Now, I wish I could read you more of the NBC article, but unfortunately, that's all the detail they provide. They don't provide any kind of direct quote or further context for their claim. They just say that they have sources that told them that the pipe bomb suspect had communicated to the FBI after he was arrested, when he was being interviewed, that he believed conspiracy theories about the 2020 election. Well, I have sources that tell me much more detail than that. My sources tell me that the word Brian Cole actually used in his interview with the FBI, that he did actually make this comment. He said that he believed that the election in 2020 was stolen. But before the mainstream media runs away with this, before the left deliberately, willfully misrepresents Brian Cole Jr. to be a Trump supporter because they want him to be, my sources tell me there is widespread, almost universal belief within the FBI that those comments made by Brian Cole Jr., in which he said he believed the 2020 election was stolen, were actually just a legal maneuver. They believe that he was coached by his lawyer to make that comment in an attempt to secure a pardon from President Trump. Actually, a retroactive pardon, because President Trump had issued a pardon for anybody convicted of a January 6th related crime. There's widespread belief, my sources tell me, within the FBI that Brian Cole Jr.'s lawyer was simply pulling a legal trick. There is no other evidence, according to my sources, in Brian Cole Jr.'s background that my sources have seen or heard, and they are in a position to know, that would indicate in any way, shape, or form that Brian Cole Jr. is a Trump supporter. What's funny is NBC is one of the only organizations that makes this claim. They're one of the only organizations that wrote an article about this comment from Brian Cole Jr. And as I mentioned a moment ago, you notice in this article, there's probably 6, 7, 8 paragraphs in this article. There's really no more detail than that first sentence. The first sentence, which I read to you, which said, the man charged with planting 2 pipe bombs near the Democratic and Republican Party headquarters on the eve of January 6th told the FBI he believed conspiracy theories about the 2020 election, according to 2 people familiar with the matter. Well, the reason why NBC phrased it in that way and refused to expound is even among liberal media, believe it or not, there is a widespread understanding that this comment was a legal maneuver. Even those leftists, the propagandists in the mainstream media, well, they might do bad things and propagate propaganda on a regular basis, but they're not always totally stupid. And my peers, or my counterparts, I should say, in the left-wing media, generally agree with what my source tells me, that there is widespread belief in the FBI that this was just a legal maneuver coached by his lawyer, coached him to say. That's the first interesting piece of information. Of course, the left wants to pretend that Brian Cole Jr. is a Trump supporter, that Republicans are violent, and that if you so much as question anything fishy happening around the 2020 election, you're inciting an insurrection. Your words are violence. That, of course, is who the mainstream media is at their core. But yet again, they have their reporting partially true, because technically Brian Cole Jr. made this comment, but without any context. They're selectively cherry-picking this in order to make you think a certain thing that they want you to think, versus helping you see the truth. That's the first piece of information. The second piece of information is fascinating. My sources tell me that there is actually an element of truth to the report that some of the cell phone data that was collected in the days and weeks after January 6th, that some of that data actually was corrupted. Now, you remember the former head of the Washington field office, Stephen D'Antuono, testifying to Congress that there was corrupted data. Now, there was controversy at the time when Stephen D'Antuono said this. It almost appeared as if D'Antuono was telling a lie, because when the Loudermilk and Massey report on the pipe bombing came out, they reported that the cell phone providers had told them that none of their data was corrupted and that nobody associated with the U.S. federal government had ever come to them after they delivered data and said, hey, there's a problem with this data. And it appeared, I even made this comment on my show last week, it appeared that Stephen D'Antuono wasn't telling the truth. Well, according to my sources, what Stephen D'Antuono said was technically partially true. But again, the context of his comment doesn't truly match the reality of what's going on here. So let me back up for a second. After the FBI arrested Brian Cole Jr. on December 4th, we were told by FBI Director Kash Patel and his deputy Dan Bongino that there wasn't new information. There wasn't new information that was input into this investigation in order to crack the case. We were told, in fact, all of this information existed all along within the FBI, inside the Federal Bureau of Investigation, that it was simply a new team, an ethical team, a non-corrupt team examining this existing data that led to the arrest of Brian Cole Jr. And it was one of the things that gave me pause about this report, about this arrest, not the report. Is the FBI a reliable narrator? That was my question. Do we trust information that's left behind by the old FBI? How do you know that that information hasn't been biased? How do you know it's not been planted? Well, it turns out, again, it's a little more complex than that. It is true that there is a new investigative team. In fact, my sources tell me there have been multiple new investigative teams put on the pipe bomber case. There's been turnover on that team, you could say. But it wasn't purely old information that led to the arrest of Brian Cole Jr. My sources tell me that there was an element of corrupted data, and they needed the cell phone carrier, in this case it was AT&T, to retrieve some additional data points, and that was what ultimately led to the arrest of Brian Cole Jr. But that particular breakthrough, the retrieval of those corrupted data points, actually just happened within the last few weeks. Now, the way I understood this, and I'm no technical expert here, I'm not a data scientist, and I don't know how data is stored and protected as well as the techies who are sitting here with us today. But it was my understanding, based on the description given to me by my sources, that it wasn't too difficult to retrieve the non-corrupted data, even though they had some corrupted data points. It was my understanding, at least, given the descriptions given to me by my sources, that the FBI asking AT&T to retrieve the non-corrupted data was kind of the equivalent of just sending a follow-up email saying, hey, can you check your backup servers? And AT&T saying, sure, here you go. So in that case, when we look at Stephen D'Antuono's testimony, him saying that there were corrupted data, and that's what caused the FBI at the time to stop investigating the pipe bomber, yes, there's an element of truth to that. There were technically some corrupted data points, but it really didn't paint the whole story. It really didn't allow us to see the reality that it really wasn't too hard to get the non-corrupted data. It just took an additional question to the cell phone provider, and the cell phone provider was happy to provide that information. That seems fairly significant. Again, a reflection on Stephen D'Antuono's character. Yes, potentially also allowing him to wiggle out of any kind of accusation of perjury in front of the U.S. Congress. Now, interestingly, the biggest question of all that I have, that you have, that we don't have an answer to, is, of course, in the days and weeks following January 6th, when the FBI was creating this geofence and collecting phone data to try to track down the device of the individual who had planted those pipe bombs. We read in the Loudermilk and Massey report that the FBI had collected over 180 phone numbers, and then they narrowed it down, and they narrowed it down again, all the way until they had narrowed it down to one phone number. Now, I wish I could tell you that I could confirm that that phone number was Brian Cole's, but I can't. I can't confirm that. I don't have that information. But what I can tell you is my sources, when I specifically asked them, somebody at the FBI had to have made a deliberate decision to stop the investigation at the time, back in 2021. Who was the name of that person? Do we know? My sources tell me, my sources who are in a position to know, tell me that the person at the FBI who made the decision to stop the investigation, it is believed that that name is now known. Now, I can't break that name to you today. I don't know that name, but my sources tell me that in the upper echelons of the FBI, it's believed that name, the person within the FBI who made the decision originally to stop the investigation into the pipe bomber, right when they were on the cusp of solving this case, it's believed that that person's identity is now known. If this be the case, and my sources are reliable sources, if this be the case, It can only be a matter of time until you and I are also informed of the identity of that person. And we can hope and we can pray and we ought to demand from our elected officials that that person face full accountability under the law. We don't have all the answers to all the questions, like I said at the beginning of the show, but we do have the beginnings of some of the answers of some of the questions, and we will keep asking until we get all of the information that we need. Another piece of information, now this is not new per se, it was reported by the New York Post just a day or two ago. We have learned a little more about the background of Brian Cole Jr. His family says he's borderline autistic, that he is not necessarily nonverbal, but very antisocial. His neighbors claim that he never interacted with them. It appears that he also had a chronically online life. Now, for those of you not familiar with the phrase chronically online, there is a vulnerability in this day and age for young men to spend all of their time in the bowels of the internet, on chat forums, watching pornography, letting a distorted, oftentimes evilly influenced subculture online influence who they are in real life because of the outsized amount of time that they spend online. Hence the phrase chronically online. So we have found out from the New York Post that Brian Cole Jr. seems to fit this description of a chronically online young man. And in fact, he is part of the brony subculture. The brony subculture is a topic we've just unfortunately had to discuss multiple times on this show at this point, because the brony subculture, for those uninitiated in perverted fetishes online, it is a group of grown men who are essentially fangirls of My Little Pony. You know, the children's toy for little girls, the unicorn-looking ponies with long, curly, pink manes. There is a subculture of grown men who are addicted to My Little Pony. They call themselves bronies. Bro, ponies, you get it. Well, an interesting part of the brony subculture would be weird just in and of itself, kind of disturbing, perverted. There's an element of the brony subculture, and I don't know exactly what it is, but this has become a common recurrent theme in some of these young men who have committed acts of mass violence in our nation. A couple of weeks ago, we discussed shooter Wes Rowley. You remember the man who shot the Idaho firefighters. He was also a brony. Robert Westman, the transgender identifying individual, born biological male, who was beginning to identify female, who opened fire at the Catholic Church in Minnesota just a couple months ago, was also part of this brony subculture. And that, of course, is no coincidence. This online fetish of grown men playing with My Little Pony is not so widespread that it would be just a fact of life that, yeah, of course, young men are all into this. No. When you have at least 3 examples that I just gave you off the top of my head of young men who have committed acts of mass violence, who all participated in this subculture, well, it begs a little bit more investigation. This particular individual, this alleged pipe bomber, Brian Cole Jr., he posted online as I Delta Velocity. He uploaded 87 pictures of My Little Pony fan art just to one forum in particular. One of his drawings is depicted, one of the ponies he drew, is depicted with a bionic leg brace. Another post was inspired by Star Wars, according to the New York Post. And in the speech bubble, the My Little Pony is quoted saying, "I'm not cute, I'm deadly," which apparently is a line from a Star Wars video game. Brian Cole Jr. also allegedly had a Tumblr account, which was focused on My Little Pony artwork. And in one comment made by Brian Cole Jr.'s alleged username, he drew a picture of a pony and said, "I'd rather give her an RPG. What can I say? Explosions are cool." RPG, of course, is referring to a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Suffice to say, this man seems disturbed. It seems that there's indications of significant mental health issues. But as I said, we had a lot of questions. We are beginning to get some answers. But the biggest questions of all, what was the motive of Brian Cole Jr.? We don't yet know. And who at the FBI decided to memory hole this investigation right before it was cracked? Well, that name may be known at the FBI, according to my sources, but we have not yet been made aware of that. Again, we will continue to ask questions until we get to the bottom of this. All right. We talked this week about Charlie Kirk's alleged killer, Tyler Robinson, and the fact that Tyler Robinson is a leftist by his own admission, his own words. His mother also said so. His friend said so. Tyler Robinson admitted in writing that he killed Charlie Kirk because, quote, some hate can't be negotiated out. We discussed how shocking, infuriating, unacceptable it is that only 24% of the American people know that Tyler Robinson was a leftist because of the mainstream media and Hollywood and leftists online and loud right-wing voices who are obscuring the investigation based on their own preconceived biases or their own preconceived villains. I want to show you something about this investigation into Tyler Robinson. And I'm going to bring that up in just a moment. But first, I want to talk to you about Crowd Health, another sponsor whom I am proud to partner with. This time of year, insurance companies, of course, are hoping you'll sleepwalk into another cycle of overpriced premiums, network headaches, endless fine print. They call it open enrollment season, where they're betting you won't question anything, but you should, because there's finally a better way. Crowd Health is not insurance. I like to call it assurance. It's a community of people who've had enough of the old system or are taking healthcare into their own hands. My husband and I quit our health insurance over a year ago and joined Crowd Health. We have been remarkably well taken care of and happy with this system, this alternative to health insurance. For under $100 a month, you get access to prescription discounts, lab testing tools, a network of quality doctors, and a team that negotiates medical bills on your behalf. And if something major does happen, and it does in all of our lives at some point, well, you pay the first $500, and then the crowd, that's me and my husband and the rest, step in to help you pay the rest. It's actually what healthcare used to feel like before it got hijacked by bureaucracy and Obamacare. Crowd Health members have already saved over $40 million simply by refusing to overpay. You can too. Highly recommend it. Join me and others. This open enrollment, take your power back. Join Crowd Health to get started today for $99 for your first 3 months. Go to joincrowdhealth.com and use my promo code Liz. That's joincrowdhealth.com, promo code Liz. Don't pay your enormous premiums. Just have unreachable deductibles and have your claims denied. Do something better. Joincrowdhealth.com, promo code Liz. All right, Charlie Kirk's alleged killer, Tyler Robinson, was a leftist by his own admission. His mother also testified, not under oath, but told the public that he was increasingly left-leaning, especially on transgender and gay issues. Tyler Robinson's friends and acquaintances who used to spend time with him at his apartment, they also said that he had previously been apolitical, though his parents were Republican, but then his political views began to change as he became more involved and then sexually involved with the transgender roommate, Lance Twiggs. Tyler Robinson, of course, admitted in writing to killing Charlie Kirk. And the reason why, when he was asked by his transgender lover why he did it, he said because some hate can't be negotiated out. There is simply no question whether Tyler Robinson was a leftist or not. There are questions, valid questions, about whether Tyler Robinson acted alone. I think those questions need to be answered, especially given the fact that in the days and weeks leading up to Charlie Kirk's assassination, there were a half dozen individuals, most of them from the area in Utah, that seemed to signal by posting online some foreknowledge of the murder of Charlie Kirk. It's a perfectly valid question to ask whether Tyler Robinson acted alone, whether he had any accomplices, whether anybody else knew about it, whether he discussed it with anyone else, whether anyone helped him. Perfectly valid. What is perhaps less valid is asking whether Tyler Robinson were rejecting the evidence that indicates that Tyler Robinson was, in fact, the killer. Candace Owens has said she doesn't believe Tyler Robinson was the killer. The reason she gave for that claim is because she said the text messages between Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs, she said Discord denies that those text messages were sent on their platform. Well, according to the indictment, they were never on Discord. They were text messages. So Candace got her facts wrong on that. And her second reason is she says the text messages sound weird. And therefore, her conclusion is they must have been invented by the feds. Well, a more likely scenario is that these text messages sound weird because they were written by weird people. Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs were not normal people. These people were deeply disturbed. There's indication of severe mental illness and, of course, leftist ideology. If you are transitioning genders, quote unquote transitioning genders, taking black market HRT like Lance Twiggs was, according to an informant who spent a lot of time in his apartment, or if you're Tyler Robinson, who is engaging in sexual behavior with Lance Twiggs, well, that's an indication that you might be a weirdo. If you're a weirdo, you might talk like a weirdo. All that being said, I want to read to you a post made by Jack Posobiec, because this is necessary for our entire country to hear. This is what Jack writes. He said, the case against Tyler Robinson is straightforward. They pulled his DNA off the actual Mauser 98 itself. Trigger, bolt handle, everywhere you'd touch if you were working the action. Plus the towel he used as a cheek rest, the screwdriver he left behind, and even inside the spent casing that popped out after he pulled the trigger. We're talking a 1 in a billions of trillions match. The kind of number that makes wrong guy mathematically impossible. On top of that, the state crime lab will need to confirm in court the bullet that killed Charlie has the exact same rifling marks as the test rounds fired through that specific Mauser. So unless someone wants to claim the Utah prosecutors are dumb enough to fake world-class DNA and ballistics evidence in the most watched case of the decade, knowing any decent defense team can send it all to an independent lab and blow the whole thing up in like 5 minutes flat, getting them disbarred and the case tossed, then yeah, Jack Posobiec writes, Tyler Robinson is the guy who climbed on that roof and shot Charlie Kirk. I read that, and I wanted to read it to you because I think it's a good reminder in this current environment where there's so many conspiracy theories that are swirling around the murder of Charlie Kirk, and so many valid questions from people like you and me about the details of who else might have known. How did this happen? Was anybody else involved? It's important to recognize when there is evidence to substantiate a theory. In this case, the theory being that Tyler Robinson was the killer. Actual DNA evidence substantiates that versus the claim that Tyler Robinson was not the killer. And the evidence for that claim was, as I said on the show yesterday, at best, a misunderstanding of the indictment, at worst, complete ignorance of the facts of the case. But why is this so important? Matt Walsh posted yesterday afternoon and said there is one obvious hole in the Charlie Kirk assassination story, which is that leftist trans freaks were posting about the killing before it happened. That would seem to indicate, Walsh writes, that there were potentially even more leftists involved in the plot. If there's a conspiracy, it's among leftist radical militants. But either way, all of the evidence points to this being the work of at least one, possibly a lot more than one, radical leftist scumbag. They want us dead, Matt Walsh says. They had every reason and every motivation to kill Charlie. And they did. And I read that, and it resonated quite deeply with me for the reasons that you and I have talked about at length on this show. When loud voices on the right have preconceived villains in mind and recklessly fish for any insinuation to create a false perception, but a perception nonetheless, that their chosen villain is guilty, what inevitably happens is the real conspiracy. Violent, militant, transgender groups and individuals, many of which had a track record of committing violent crimes or weirdly signaled foreknowledge of Charlie's murder, are completely ignored. To our peril, your peril, and my peril, our country's peril, as these same entities continue to plot against conservatives and Christians and Trump supporters. It's a hideous injustice to Charlie. It should infuriate every person who claims to be Charlie's friend that only 24% of voters know that Charlie Kirk's alleged killer, Tyler Robinson, was a leftist. And not just a leftist in theory, a leftist who was living with and engaged in a sexual relationship with a man pretending to be a transgender woman. He was living his ideology, not just speaking it. But remember, whenever there's a claim, whenever there's a conspiracy, ask who has the evidence. Is there evidence that Tyler Robinson was the killer? Or is there evidence that Tyler Robinson wasn't the killer? Well, in this case, the evidence is the DNA, which could be easily debunked if it's not true. And the evidence that Tyler Robinson isn't the killer, well, there is no evidence of that. There's also the human nature aspect of this. Tyler Robinson's family, his friends, his acquaintances, nobody in Tyler Robinson's sphere has come out and said, this is a false accusation. In fact, Tyler Robinson's parents were instrumental in him turning himself in to law enforcement. Think about this. Do you think for an instant if your child, even if you didn't agree with your child politically, even if they were on the wrong path, do you think for an instant if your child was accused of murder and you had evidence or a deeply held belief that it was simply impossible, would you remain quiet? Of course you wouldn't. You'd be the loudest voice out there screaming, this is injustice, this is a false accusation, my son didn't do this, there's no way this could have happened. And yet we haven't heard any of that from anyone who knew Tyler Robinson. And that should say a lot to us. Marjorie Taylor Greene has gotten herself into some hot water. And this one, my friends, is a real head scratcher. I've told you before, I often give the benefit of the doubt. I'm generous with people on our own side. Even if they say something stupid or do something stupid, as long as we're generally moving, together towards a shared goal. If you're weird, whatever. But this is beyond the pale. I'm going to show you this picture of Marjorie Taylor Greene in a moment. But first, I want to talk to you about preborn. This Christmas, as we celebrate the gift of life, you have an opportunity to share that same gift with a mother and her baby. Imagine a young woman facing an unplanned pregnancy. She feels alone. She's scared. She's unsure what to do. She may have no support around her. In fact, she may be feeling pressure and coercion to abort that baby. She needs hope. And that's where Preborn Ministries comes in. I mean, think about Steve Jobs, Andrea Bocelli, Steph Curry, Jack Nicholson, Celine Dion, Oprah. All of these individuals have one thing in common. They were unplanned pregnancies. And so many others. Maybe you were unplanned. I have no doubt that you know someone, you love someone who was. God's plan of redemption often works in the unplanned. When a woman is struggling to make a life-altering decision, Preborn network of clinics is there. Every mother that Preborn serves is facing this existential decision. And when she sees her baby's face and limbs on that ultrasound screen, did you know that when a mother sees her baby on an ultrasound screen, she is more than likely to choose life for that child? And you can help make that happen. For just $28, you can fund an ultrasound for a woman who may be more likely to choose life after seeing her precious baby on that screen. In fact, thanks to a special matching grant, your gift is doubled. I highly encourage you to prayerfully consider donating. Dial pound 250, say the keyword baby, and know when you say that word that it's not just a word, it's a person, that you're saving that baby and you're saving the soul of that mother too. That's pound 250, keyword baby, or you can go to preborn.com/Liz. That's preborn.com/Liz. I commented probably 2 weeks ago after Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene announced that she was resigning from Congress. That one caught me off guard. I didn't expect her to do that. She seemed to like the limelight a little bit too much to quit Congress. I'm still not exactly sure what's behind her resignation, but it didn't sit quite right with me. While, of course, she's free to make that decision, unless you have a serious, grave reason to resign before the end of your term, you probably shouldn't. Because people, your donors and your constituents, your voters, they've invested in you. They've given you their time and their talent and their treasure. in order to help elect you, and to quit in the middle of your term doesn't sit quite right with me. I understand Marjorie Taylor Greene has had her beefs with President Trump. They've gone back and forth, and maybe that's really all there is behind her resignation, that she doesn't want to lose a primary because her primary opponent would be endorsed by President Trump. That could be it. However, there seems to be a more radical change that's taking place in Marjorie Taylor Greene, and it's not a change that I particularly like to see. This photograph of Marjorie Taylor Greene was posted on X by a woman named Medea Benjamin. Medea Benjamin is the woman in pink. She's wearing a t-shirt that says, "I heart Palestinian liberation." She's standing in that photo next to Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she says, "We visited Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene today to thank her for becoming such a strong anti-war voice in Congress and tell her we will miss her." And when I saw this, I took a double take, because look at the bottom of that t-shirt. The woman, the pink t-shirt. What organization is she with? I knew I recognized her username when I saw it, Medea Benjamin. She's the co-founder of Code Pink. Code Pink is an ostensibly anti-war entity that operates all around the world. They're the feminists that go topless to protest wars. You've probably seen pictures of that, unfortunately. Hopefully your eyes have recovered by now in Europe. They're radically anti-war, and the Medea Benjamin is the co-founder of that group. The other co-founder is Jody Evans. Jody Evans is the wife of Roy Singham. Roy Singham. Marjorie Taylor Greene is standing in this photograph, smiling and visiting with Singham-funded Code Pink. This group, Code Pink, now gets the majority of their funding from Roy Singham himself. Founded, as I said, by his wife. Roy Singham is the billionaire communist who is currently cowardly hiding in Shanghai, where he shares an office space with a propaganda firm of the Chinese Communist Party. Roy Singham sends his money through a web of leftist groups in the United States to fund the violent left-wing riots that we have seen over the course of the past several years in the United States, like the ostensibly anti-ICE riots in LA, where we saw masked protesters with Palestinian flags and Mexican flags and the Hamas keffiyeh around their neck and covering up their face, pouring gasoline on police cars, throwing rocks and other projectiles at law enforcement, breaking windows in law enforcement precincts, blocking highways. It wasn't a protest, an organic protest of President Trump's mass deportation. It was a highly coordinated and funded effort. And it was funded and coordinated by groups that get money from Roy Singham, like the Party of Socialism and Liberation and the People's Forum. Similarly, you remember the riots on college campuses run by Students for Justice in Palestine. That's also funded by Roy Singham. As Code Pink is. When Jody Evans married Roy Singham, suddenly the source of her funding changed. Roy Singham began to fund her group, and the verbiage coming out of Code Pink also drastically changed. For example, Code Pink used to speak strongly against the abuse of the Uyghur Muslims in China by the Chinese Communist Party. But suddenly, after Jody Evans married Roy Singham and Roy Singham began to fund her little group, Code Pink, and they began to hide out in Shanghai, given explicit permission to do so by the Chinese Communist Party, suddenly Jody Evans became vocally very supportive of China. She loves China. She can't think of anything China's done wrong. She has a book about China. And all those abuses that she used to expose just suddenly were brushed under the rug. This is who Marjorie Taylor Greene is palling around with. And Marjorie Taylor Greene defends this behavior. This wasn't, in fact, when I first saw this, I had hoped that maybe this was a book signing or a town hall or a public event where Marjorie Taylor Greene was posing with so many people that she just maybe didn't know who she was posing with. That's happened to everybody. If you take a picture with 500 people in the course of 20 minutes, there's someone in there who probably doesn't like you, and you may not recognize them when they take a photo. It doesn't mean that you are associated with their ideology, but that's what I would have liked to believe. But then Marjorie Taylor Greene posted on X defending her association with Code Pink. She said she's been friends with Medea Benjamin for multiple years, despite the fact that the party in Washington, D.C. doesn't like her to do so. You're friends with a group that's funded by Roy Singham, the billionaire communist who actively tries to destabilize the United States because he hates us. It's a little beyond troubling, is it not? She goes, this is her post. We'll show it on the screen. I'm America first and fully against funding foreign wars and support peace because that's good for everyone, especially the most innocent people, children. I've enjoyed a friendship with Medea for a few years now, even though politics says that's not allowed. I've learned to find bridges with others, and that's how we all win and ultimately leads to peace. Who are you and what have you done with Marjorie Taylor Greene? Now, you might be thinking, Liz, it's possible that she doesn't know that Code Pink is funded by Roy Singham because it was co-founded by Roy Singham's wife. I wish I could believe that, but Marjorie Taylor Greene, to her credit, I praised her at the time, and she deserves kudos for this, was one of the first, if not the first, member of Congress to actually call for an investigation into Roy Singham because of his funding of these radical leftist groups that foment violence in our country. She knows who this group is and what they stand for. So maybe if this is her behavior, if this is the people she wishes to associate with, maybe it is better that she step away from her commitment to the United States Congress. You know, last night I filmed a special with Glenn Beck, and it was a lot of fun. We talked about some heavy topics, but managed to have a fun time nonetheless. We were talking about the biggest stories of 2025 and making our predictions for what's going to happen in 2026. And I think that you will like my prediction for 2026. My biggest prediction for 2026, and if you have time, watch the entire Glenn Beck special because I think you will enjoy it. My biggest prediction for 2026 is that a member of the U.S. Congress will be denaturalized, removed from her seat in Congress, and deported from the United States of America. And it's no secret to whom I am referring. It's no secret that the member of Congress who I think will face denaturalization, removal from Congress, and deportation from the United States is Ilhan Omar. A new report from the Daily Mail reveals pretty airtight evidence that Ilhan Omar actually did marry her brother all those years ago. It's an accusation that's been circulating for quite some time, but no one ever had exact proof because Somalia is not so good with the documentation since they're a third world war-torn country. But there have always been rumors swirling that Ilhan Omar married her brother. Well, according to a new investigation by the Daily Mail, there's even more evidence than that. Ilhan Omar's first husband, she married here in the United States only in a religious ceremony. She married a Muslim man named Hirsi. They were married by a Muslim cleric in an Islamic ceremony, but they never married civilly. So their marriage was never recognized by the United States government. They got married purely in a religious setting. And Ilhan Omar was married to Hirsi for many years. But then suddenly, she, in a civil ceremony, was married to a different man. She married a man named Elmi, the man who is accused of being her brother. And what's odd, Ilhan Omar is clearly a practicing Muslim. She wears a hijab everywhere she goes, and I believe professes that she is a practicing Muslim, and yet she was married to Elmi by a Christian minister, which seems odd that a Christian minister would agree to marry two Muslims, but it also seems odd that two Muslims would ask to be married by a Christian minister. And perhaps the reason that they ask a Christian minister to marry them, according to someone who knows them both, is because any Muslim cleric around the area that they live would have recognized the familial relationship, the sibling relationship between the two of them, and would have refused to perform the marriage ceremony. By marrying Elmi, Ilhan Omar secured him residence in the United States, although he did later leave for the United Kingdom. But that's not even the strongest reason. That's not even the primary reason that Ilhan Omar should face denaturalization. The primary reason is her status as a naturalized citizen was, according to some very credible reports, based on a lie. Ilhan Omar's father claimed that he was fleeing Somalia because the communist Marxist regime at the time was after him. But sources tell journalist Ashley Rinsberg that Ilhan Omar's father was actually a member of that violent communist Marxist regime. He worked in propaganda, and he was fleeing because the government was being toppled by the people, and he was afraid for his life. Well, eventually Ilhan Omar's father claimed asylum here in the United States, and Ilhan Omar became a naturalized American citizen. But if it was based on a lie, then her citizenship ought to be revoked. Interestingly, this is not just a story that ought to be used politically to torment a member of the opposition. We have laws in our country, laws that should be enforced and followed. Otherwise, it renders our laws completely meaningless. And thankfully, border czar Tom Homan has confirmed that Ilhan Omar is, in fact, under investigation for immigration fraud. Take a listen to this.
The border czar, Tom Homan, joins us tonight to talk about Minnesota as well as a number of other issues. And, sir, it's good to have you back on the show. Trump mentioning the Daily Mail reporting from 2020 that Ilhan Omar married her brother to get into the country. This was last week. Take a listen.
Look at their nation. Look how bad their nation is. It's not even a nation. It's just people walking around killing each other. They've taken billions and billions of dollars. They have a representative, Ilhan Omar, who they say married her brother. It's a fraud.
Calls that a fraud. It's a story that has never been successfully refuted, even though it's now a 5-year-old story. That's clearly a deportable offense. Is there an investigation into that?
You know, I just got advised by a fraud investigator the other day on that. I asked the question, who reviewed the file and says that, there was immigration fraud involved. The statute of limitations became an issue in the last 4 years when this was first brought up. Who was president? Who ran DOJ? So pulling the records now, pulling the files, and we're looking at it. But this fraud investigator, who I know personally, one of the best fraud investigators in HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, said there's no doubt he reviewed the file. So I'm running that down this week, matter of fact, and we'll see.
It's tremendous that, and according to the Secretary, Kristi Noem of DHS, she said nearly 50% of the visas are fraudulent in this community. That would mean that half the Somali refugees are here in some way illegally. What's going to happen? Is something actually going to happen? Are there going to be people stripped of their visas, deported? Are we going to see that?
Absolutely. Those days are over. Thank God President Trump's in the White House. We're going to look at all of them. We're going to look at those here illegally, of course. We're going to look at those here under a visa or some sort of, immigration process that are criminals. We're going to look at the national security threats. But those who came through a process that weren't properly vetted, who didn't provide documentation, who slipped through the Biden's weak processes on, giving visas and temporary, whether student visas or visitors visas or whatever. We're going the whole gamut.
He's running it down this week, he says. Make it come true, Mr. Homan. Make my 2026 prediction come true even before 2026 hits. There is evidence. There's so much evidence. This is cut and dry evidence. And I'm not even one that jumps on a gossip story from the beginning. I remember when I first heard this report that Ilhan Omar married her brother, I was like, that sounds like a conspiracy theory that's forwarded on email by your boomer uncle. And listen, when you read it, that's not what it is. This is a credible accusation. She has 2 credible accusations on an AOL email. That's what my producer Spencer saying in my ear. Definitely that would come from an AOL email. 2 credible accusations of immigration fraud, marrying her brother and her father. Her father's name is Nur Omar Mohammed, and that he neglected to mention that he was a senior officer in the military of the Siad Barre regime, likely specializing in propaganda, according to Ashley Rinsberg. That is grounds for denaturalization, removal from Congress, and deportation. Please make my 2026 wish come true. I'd like to take a moment here and thank you for listening and standing with us. The truth is, Blaze TV only exists because people like you refuse to let fear silence truth. Darkness never has the final word, not in America and not with us. Now, this is not about one personality or one network. It's about a family of people who believe America is worth defending and worth healing. And when you subscribe, you make sure that truth has a voice, not just today, but for the next generation. By joining, you are standing shoulder to shoulder with a community that knows America is still worth fighting for. Join Blaze TV today at blazetv.com/Liz and get $20 off right now. For as little as $8 a month, you can be part of shaping the future. That's blazetv.com/Liz. I'll see you over there. Thank you all for watching today. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.